Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. We are coming up on one of the last videos of 2024, so I thought I would round out this reading year by doing the end of year book tag. We have quite a few questions to get through. I took some inspiration from Sarah, from Larry, from Katie. I picked from all of those for my tag questions that I'm going to answer, and I'll make sure to list them down below. But before we hop in, make sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. And let's go ahead and hop into our first question. Wanted to start off on a positive note, so let's talk about some of my favorite books of 2024. These do not need much introducing, but I'm going to go ahead and say that my favorite series of the year are the ACOTAR series and the Throne of Glass. For ACOTAR, I have read the entire series and loved it so thoroughly. It was honestly my introduction to fantasy novels, and it was quite the way to start off my fantasy reading journey. Honestly, book 1 is my least favorite in the series, but everything else is about a 5 stars for me. So as of right now, this is my top series of the year. However, I project that the Throne of Glass series is going to overtake this. I've just simply only read the first 3 books of Throne of Glass, but this is already starting off so strong. I honestly couldn't love the main character in the series anymore. I think she is such a badass and one of the best female leads I've ever read about. But alas, since I haven't finished this series yet, and I know it only gets better from here, it hasn't overtaken ACOTAR, but I imagine in my 2025 wrap-up, I'm going to be praising this series. If we want to talk about my favorite standalone, I am going to give it to Happy Place by Emily Henry. This book is a 6-star read. It found me at the perfect time. I obviously love the second chance romance that happens in this book, but really what stood out for me was the discussions around adult friendships and how friendships change as you get older. It helped me put into words what I was feeling about adult friendships, and is a book that I'm never going to forget, and I can't wait for the day that I do a reread on this. And finally, I did want to shout out my favorite nonfiction book of the year, and that's going to be Becoming by Michelle Obama. I've had this book for years. I was always pretty intimidated by it because it is pretty long. However, I listened to a lot of this book as an audiobook, which is narrated by Michelle Obama herself. Hearing the stories of her life through her voice made me feel so connected to her. I love how interesting of a person she is, even besides who her husband is. She's so successful in her own right, and I think is justifiably an inspiration to others. So after all of that praise, let's go ahead and talk about some books that I didn't love, but thought I would, / some disappointing reads of the year. I read a couple different books by this author, so I had a lot of high hopes going into this one. Additionally, this book has a lot of discussions around anxiety, which I thought would really resonate me, but didn't. And that book would be Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. I have heard so many people rave about this book. I've heard so many people rave about our male main character, Jacob, as he's the one whose anxiety is notated on page. But I actually ended up giving this book a 2.5 stars. I felt like Jacob's character was strangely one-dimensional. Yes, there is a lot of discussion around his anxiety, but I feel like that was basically his only personality trait. And as someone who struggles with social anxiety severely, I can also recognize in myself that that's not my only personality trait. It's not the only thing that goes through my mind. So I just felt like it was honestly a little bit overdone. And then to go along with that, the female main character and how she interacted with his anxiety. The first 70% of the book, she was so understanding, really knew how to meet him where he was at, and I would say a safe place for him. However, during the third act conflict, the later part of the book, she was doing such triggering things that obviously put him in a tailspin with his anxiety. And I just felt like her character development through the conflicts was so inconsistent with what we'd seen through the previous part of the book that I just really couldn't get behind what the author was doing with her. And then also the very end, some information our female main character learns about at the very end of this book, I just felt like was totally unnecessary and really just did it in for me to where I literally wanted to throw this book at the wall. I would categorize this next book mainly as a disappointment because I've heard so much hype recently around this author. This is my first time reading anything by her. Had a lot of high hopes. Unfortunately, this one fell so flat for me. I'm talking about Angel Falls by Kristen Hanna. Kristen Hanna is the author of The Nightingale, Firefly Lane, and then multiple other really famous historical fiction novels. I had a lot of high hopes with this one. I was really looking for an emotional read. This story follows follows a family after the wife/mom of the family gets into an accident and is in a coma for an extended period of time. And we're kind of following the other family members as they learn to cope with that. And then some ideas of what brings her back from a coma. Is it the love of her family? Is it the love of her ex-husband? Is it prayer? I don't really know what this author was trying to make a statement of, but whatever it was, I felt like it totally missed the mark. I really hated the characterization of her husband, how he treated his young son, calling him pathetic multiple times for how he was coping with his mom's physical state was really jarring to me, and ultimately why I also rated this book a 2.5 stars. Final disappointment, and this one took me so much by surprise. I have only heard of people rating this book a 5 stars, and unfortunately, again, I believe I gave this either a 2.5 or maybe just a 2 stars. That is Love in Other Words by Christina Lauren. This is a childhood friends to lovers second chance romance where we get a dual timeline of watching these two people fall in love as teenagers and then reconnecting a decade later and refalling in love as adults. I really enjoyed the teenage love aspect, watching that first love play out, because that's always a very impactful moment in your adolescence development. However, the conflict that happened as they were teenagers and how that carried on into their adulthood, I felt like was insane. And I felt like a lot of the conflicts that came up throughout the book were literally just trauma dumping on one character, to where this book was like completely unreasonable, unbelievable, when in a contemporary romance I would expect that there are some believable aspects of this story. This was such a disappointing read to me. I really did not enjoy my time while reading this, and honestly makes me nervous for more Christina Lauren reads, because I find their conflicts that they write are just so over the top and overdone. Next category is an unpopular book you loved / underdog book. So for a book that I really didn't have that high of hopes for, but ended up liking a lot, was Mile High by Liz Tom Ford. I have heard so many people dog on this book because of our male main character. I will say he is a very sexually forward person. He's very physically based. So there is a lot of spice in this book. I would give this book a spice rating of like 4 out of 5. So know that going into the entire Windy City series, but I actually enjoyed the male main character. He had a complex past, which I felt like made his character more dynamic. He also went to therapy, so he was very aware of his emotions and was able to communicate them well. And then he also just like absolutely worshipped the ground our female main character walked on. Another cool part about this book is that our female main character has some plus size representation, which is not done a lot in romance books, but I actually loved their relationship dynamic because he fell first and he fell hard. It was just fun to see a girly get worshipped. I love to see that. I have read book 2 in the Windy City series. I didn't enjoy that one as much, which I know is very much not the norm for how people typically rate the series, but I am excited to continue on. I've heard that book 3 and 4 are both amazing. The next question is talking about overhyped books that I feel like didn't live up to their hype, and I might ruffle some feathers with this one because I know both of these series I'm about to talk about have some diehard fans. But to start it off, let's talk about Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. This book was the highest rated on my Goodreads TBR list, and I feel like absolutely is overhyped. It has like a 4.5 something rating on Goodreads, which is insanity. I found the female main character of this book so annoying, and her character traits were really inconsistent in my opinion. We were constantly told throughout the story that she was very frail and bitter and small and weak, and then a lot of things would happen which very much just didn't meet that character trait, and suddenly she would become the strongest person ever and have the most hugest things happen for her. And I was just so frustrated listening about her and her character. The best part of this book by far is our male main character, but honestly he's just a copy of the Bat Boys that Sarah J Maas did better. So I can't justifiably give this book a super high rating because the best part of it is copied from another book. Additionally, I've heard that the next book in the series is a major letdown, so that leads me not to want to continue the series at all. I know that book 3 in the series is coming out soon, and I've already seen some reviews that that book is also a letdown. So I just don't think that the Fourth Wing universe is really for me. I'll stick with my Massiverse every day of the week because Sarah J Maas just does it better. Next overhyped book that I read recently is The Zodiac Academy by the Twisted Sisters. I actually DNF'd this book because it was so horrendous in my opinion. The writing is so childish. I feel like high schoolers wrote this. We follow two twins who are living in the mortal realm and end up being the lost heirs of this celestial kingdom, Solaria. And they get taken to this Zodiac Academy where if they graduate, they're able to take over and reclaim their throne and their inheritance. However, there have been 4 sit-in families since the ruling king and queen died, who each have an heir, and the heirs just aggressively bully, aka physically abuse these girls as soon as they get to the Zodiac Academy. And I'm just not going to sit and read about physical abuse and call it a bully romance and romanticize it, because what are we really accomplishing as a society by doing that? Next question is talking about some of my favorite book couples of the year. While I think Throne of Glass is definitely going to have one of my favorite couples come out of it, since I haven't finished the series, I can't say anything yet, but this should be no surprise whenever I talk about Feyre and Rhysand. If this book doesn't get you going, I don't know what will. The shadow daddy character traits that Rebecca Yarros tried to do in Fourth Wing could just never beat what Sarah J Maas was able to do in this one. So absolutely have to give it to them. I am so hopelessly in love with Rhysand. And then also I'm going to give an honorable mention shout out to Nesta and Cassian. Those two are always going to hold a special place in my heart because I find more similarities between Hunter and myself and Nesta and Cassian than I do with Feyre and Rhysand. But regardless, I love both of these couples a hell of a lot. Now let's go ahead and talk about just my favorite main character of the year. If I'm going to give it to a female main character, I'm definitely going to give it to Celaena of the Throne of Glass series. I just love how strong she is, how much she takes control of her life, and her no-nonsense attitude. While her profession as an assassin would make you think that she's morally gray, I feel like the risks that she's willing to take for friends and loved ones and those that she feels like are being served an injustice speaks wonders for her character. And I couldn't love her more. If I'm going to give it to a male main character that I haven't discussed thus far, let's go ahead and talk about Rory Miller from The Fake Out. He's the epitome of the golden retriever MMC. This book is what made me realize that I love the reverse Grumpy Sunshine character dynamic. And I feel like there are a lot of similarities with the relationship from The Fake Out and Nesta and Cassian, but the banter that these two have, his arrogance that shines through, but again, how much he is there to worship our FMC. I just absolutely love Rory Miller. He was automatically added to the book boyfriend roster list. For our next question, what are some of the happiest books that I've read this year? Now, to me, how I'm interpreting this, I'm not saying that there's nothing sad that happens in this book. I'm just talking about how happy I felt while reading it. And something that I just finished reading was the first Harry Potter. The first Harry Potter movie is such a comfort movie for me. It is so nostalgic. It feels like the perfect Christmassy read. I felt so happy while reading this. I love seeing the magic of Hogwarts introduced. I love our characters building their friendships that we know are going to last throughout the whole series. And I just truly couldn't love the characters that we meet in this book anymore. This is another recent read, but I'm gonna shout out The Most Wonderful Crime of the Year by Ali Carter. I felt like this book was so fun. This is a Knives Out mystery meets holiday romance. We have two rivaling mystery authors who get invited to a mystery location at Christmas time, and once someone ends up missing, they have to solve the crime and figure out who done it. And I feel like the banter that we see through these main characters is honestly top tier. There were so many of their interactions that I was highlighting and laughing out loud. I'm sorry the lighting keeps changing. I'm filming with some afternoon light, so things just keep going in and out. I'm sorry if that's bothering anyone. Our next question is, what are the saddest books that you read this year? I have 3 written down. For the most part, I have them written down because there's some heavy discussions around grief. So if that's something you like to avoid in books, I probably would avoid all three of these. The first book is Beach Read by Emily Henry. By no means is this book meant to be sad. This is a contemporary romance book and there are a lot of happy elements, but this is one of the very few books of this entire year that has made me cry. Our female main character loses her dad and she kind of had a complex relationship with her dad and some secrets that she learns about him. One aspect of the story is some of the letters that he wrote, and once we got a glimpse into those letters, I was just absolutely gone, could not hold back the tears, and I will say it's probably one of the most emotional books that I read this entire year. Next is a book that I just actually only finished yesterday. I read The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. Again, this is a book with grief surrounding our female main character's father, and I don't know what it is about characters losing their dads, but I just like really cannot read about it. So much of this book focuses around death because our FMC, her dad ran a funeral home. So death has been such a constant feature in her life growing up as a kid. She was honestly made fun of a lot growing up because she was viewed as like the Addams family because they were a little kooky and also so much of their life centered around death. To add on to that, she also can see ghosts, and this book is a romance novel where she actually ends up falling in love with a ghost. Again, there are a lot of happy moments that happen within this book, but just how constant death and grief is brought up, it was very much a emotionally charged book to read and get through. Finally, I have Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. If I had to describe this book in one word, it would be melancholy. There are so many bad things that happen to the different characters that we follow. There's death, there's cheating, alcoholism, there's abandonment. There's just so many difficult situations tackled in this book, and I think the author tackles them well, but it was something that I had to take multiple breaks while listening to because it was making me so uncomfortable or triggered because the scenes were so heartbreaking. And while I wouldn't call this book a tragedy by any means, our characters are able to find some resolution by the end. You would hope to see more resolution by the end. I was hoping that the ending would be a little bit happier than what it was, but yeah, I would say all three of these books were some of the top contenders for the most emotional reads that I had to get through this year. Next, let's talk about some of the most frustrating books of the year. The first book I've written down is Life's Too Short by Abby Jimenez. This book was really frustrating for me because our female main character has a chronic illness, a chronic disease that she's dealing with throughout the book. How that was handled and the resolution of that chronic illness, I felt like was a major cop-out by the author. I really didn't respect how she chose to handle that narrative whatsoever. There was also some discussions about how she enabled some of her family members, whether that was enabling them as addicts or otherwise. Those are definitely topics I'm sensitive to, and I also think were handled poorly by the author. The next book, which is a book that I should have DNF'd 100%, was Phoenix Flame by Sarah Holland. This book was so frustrating for me because I hated our female main character. She was so immature, I think the most hypocritical character I've ever read about, and we were supposed to be rooting for her. I just absolutely couldn't get on board. I also feel like this book overall in general was a total cash grab by the author and the publisher. There was no reason that this needed to be book 2 in a series. The first book is called Havenfall. It made no sense how these books were separated into 2 because book 2 takes place 3 weeks after book 1 within the same summer, and it definitely could have been condensed into 1. It's getting real dark now. I'm hoping that the sun comes back after this one. But let's talk about some books that I haven't stopped thinking about. Obviously, I brought up the series multiple times. I promise I'm gonna shut up about it soon. I haven't stopped thinking about Throne of Glass. Don't think I ever will. Don't think I ever want to stop thinking about it, but just know I haven't stopped thinking about it. The next book was definitely out of my comfort zone, but that is Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This was a intense sci-fi novel where we follow an astronaut who has to go into space basically to save Earth. The sun is being slowly eaten away by this like organism in space, and a very small select team of the best scientists in the world get put together to try and solve this problem. Unfortunately, our astronaut in space wakes up alone and also has amnesia and cannot remember anything. He cannot remember why he's there, he cannot remember his own name, he cannot remember who his colleagues were, and we just follow him slowly start piecing together everything. And the ending of this book was also one of the very few moments that I have cried this year. I've never read a better written ending of a book. Even though this book is so science heavy, I would recommend listening to the audiobook and just understanding that there's a lot of science in it. You don't need to fully understand it, just know that everything that they're saying is backed by science, but really it's about the relationships in this book that are so impactful to the story. On a little bit of a less serious note, another book that I haven't stopped thinking about is Powerless by Lauren Roberts. As I've read more fantasy novels, I totally understand the critiques that this book gets, that it's basically just an amalgamation of a lot of other fantasy novels. I hear you, but I counter you by saying, Mr. Kai Azar, how can you not be in love with him? I also just loved the element that our female main character is an ordinary hiding in plain sight, and Kai, our male main character, is the enforcer seeking out to get rid of all ordinaries. The banter, the tension, the angst that we see within this book is just chef's kiss. It is truly perfection, and the male voice actor, if you listen to this as an audiobook, one of the best voices I've ever heard. It just honestly sealed the deal for me because the quotes that we get and listening to it in his voice, done. Absolutely done. Cannot stop thinking about this book and Kai Azar. This is a little bit of a quicker question. What are some of my favorite covers of the year? First off, I'm gonna say Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. Listen to this as an audiobook and I would 10 out of 10 recommend because it's narrated by Meryl Streep and she is the perfect voice actor for this book, but honestly this cover is a work of art. Next, I have a novel love story by Ashley Poston. I just think the colors pop so well within this book. This electric blue is unlike any other cover I have, and I just love that contrast with the neon brightness within the title. And then another shout out for a book I mentioned earlier, Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I love the ocean and how we see the 4 different children in the water all together. As you read the story, you realize the impact of what that cover shows, and I just honestly think it's stunning. Here's another like quick hit question. What's the longest book I've read this year? I wasn't expecting this one, but it's Breaking Dawn by Stephanie Meyer. I read the entire Twilight Saga in a video, but because I know the movie so well, while this book is long, it was very easy to get through. To contrast that, what is the shortest book I've read this year? I didn't want to count any novellas because obviously novellas are intentionally short. So the actual shortest standalone book that I've read this year is this nonfiction read called The Inspirational Leader by Gifford Thomas. As you can see, this book is teeny tiny, skinny mini. It's literally only 130 pages long and the spacing and text size is very generous. I read this for work. It was okay. None of the topics or takeaways you're meant to receive as a leader are a standout to me through this book. Very much a lot of the things discussed in this book are things that I've heard before, and so it's not really something that I would recommend you go out and read. The next question is, according to Goodreads, what are the highest and lowest rated books you read throughout the year? The highest rated book that I read is A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J Maas. This average rating is a 4.65, and I would wholeheartedly agree. This book is a 5-star, 6-star read for me. The romance that happens in this book, I've said it once, I'm gonna say it again, 10 out of 10. Cannot beat the romance that takes place within this book. According to Goodreads, the lowest rated book I read this year was Leading Gracefully by Monique Talon. This book has a 3.04 star rating, which is pretty tragic. And I would actually disagree. I gave this book a 4 stars. It's very short, so I don't think it has enough time to change your life by any means, but this is a leadership book specifically for women and utilizing women's unique talents, because a lot of it discusses how leadership is mainly a man's world, and so women enter into that and try and emulate the strengths that men have. However, females have strengths of our own, so it's talking about playing into our strengths and welcoming females' capacity to lead while still being authentic to ourselves. So I actually enjoyed this book. I would not agree with the aggressively low rating. Final question of the tag is more of a reflection question, reflecting on my 2024 reading goal and what goals I want to set for 2025. So for 2024, I really didn't know what to expect out of myself because I got back into reading in March. So originally I set a reading goal of 25 because I was like, I don't know how long I'm going to be able to maintain this reading pace. So let me keep it at 25 and keep it more realistic. I think I surpassed that within 2 months. So then I was like, okay, let's go up to 50. And I got to 50 by July. So then I was like, okay, let's go up to 100. So per Goodreads, I am at 105 out of 100 books read. I'm obviously very proud of myself that I was able to maintain that reading pace and get so many books read this year. I have to say, I don't know if I want to read that many books this year. I'm very much a person that if I set a goal for myself, I will kill myself in an effort to meet that goal. So throughout December, I felt a lot of pressure to keep reading books and to hit that 100 books read, to the point where there are times that I don't want to be reading, but I am. And that just obviously leads to burnout, that leads to decreased enjoyment levels. And I really don't want to feel that way next year. Next year is also going to be a very busy year for me. Hunter and I are getting married. We have a very long honeymoon planned, and I don't want to have to feel any pressure throughout that time period that I need to be reading books at this quick pace and I'm not able to enjoy a moment because I'm thinking about and stressing about, I've only read 2 books this month. What does that mean? So I am going to decrease my reading goal for the year to 75. Over the course of 12 months, I think that's very doable. Hopefully I exceed that goal. Maybe I can get up to 100 again, but I just don't want to have the pressure within myself to reach that goal and that impact other moments that I could be enjoying more thoroughly. So that is my 2024 end of year tag. Quite a bit covered. I am happy that I think I talked about quite a few different books than I was able to talk about in my mid-year tag. The different reading vlogs I mentioned, my mid-year tag, I'll make sure to link them down below if you want to go check them out. If you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. We have a very exciting video coming to you soon. We'll be talking about a whole lot of books in that video, so don't miss out on that one. But for now, I will love you and leave you, and thank you so much for watching. Bye guys.